Testing.
Good evening. Today is Monday, September 25th, 2023, and we are at the Green Ladle. We'll call this meeting to order at 5:35 p.m. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the
Flag
flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands,
one
nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We'll move on with the school committee member introductions. Member Scott is excused absent tonight, so we'll start with Member Beauplant.
Thank you. Paul Beauplant, Ward 7 Representative.
Megan Hurd, Ward 6.
Ashley Medina, Ward 5.
Elizabeth Eames, Ward 3.
Janet Bowden, Ward 2.
Bruce Damon, Ward 1.
Megan Parks, at large.
Jake Langley, Superintendent.
Karen Paquette, Assistant Superintendent.
Thank you. Number 3 is the consent agenda. Are there any members that have any items on the consent agenda you'd like set aside? Seeing none, the consent agenda is adopted. Agenda item number 4 is public input. Members of the public may address the school committee for up to 3 minutes on non-agenda items now and on agenda items later. Comments that pertain to staff, personnel matters, or a school issue should be directed to the superintendent or the appropriate staff member of Lewiston Public Schools. Public comments shall be directed to the school committee and be brief, not repetitive, and related to the matter at hand. Before starting, please state your name, address, and affiliation with Lewiston Public Schools. Are there any members of the public that would like to speak? Please step up to the podium and push the button. It's got like shoulders ahead and little speaky boxes.
My name is Donna Gallant. I live at 533 Webster Street in Lewiston. I'm a resident of Lewiston. I am a mother, a grandmother, and a licensed clinical social worker in the state of Maine. Let me first state that I believe in redemption, forgiveness, and turning one's life around to become a better person and a contributing member to society. I believe that people can change for better. However, more importantly, I believe the safety and the protection of our most vulnerable population, our elderly, and our children. Nothing trumps the safety of our children. Not a careless or non-existent vetting policy, not going along with the dangerous inclusivity concepts of the day, and specifically not knowingly putting our children in harm's way for the sake of appearing to be an advanced and all-encompassing school system. Hard and unpopular decisions should not be sacrificed when the choices between the health and safety of our children and allowing the unvetted felons in our schools. There are certain populations that should never be allowed in our schools, specifically registered sex offenders, who often have a legal age restraints that they are required to abide by. They cannot be in contact with certain ages of children. It has been said by this committee that you cannot predict behavior, that any one of us can go out and commit a crime at any time. But what is more truthful and factual is that past behavior is the best predictor or indicator of future behavior. This is especially true for sex offenders who have a very high rate of recidivism, which is reoffending, and one of the most difficult populations to treat. And yet the school committee has not chosen to vet any of the main inside, outside people who come into our schools. I heard the word fear-mongering used to justify the MIO program in Lewiston schools and the school committee's current stance. This is not fear-mongering. It's called being responsible, accountable, and having anyone who interacts with our children being held to the highest standards possible. Anecdotally, as a parent of a child who was molested during his middle school years, and as a clinician who has worked with adult survivors.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but the 3 minutes is up. Thank you.
Good evening. School council members, I'm Bruce King. I am the co-executive director of MIO, and I'm speaking on behalf of Maine Inside Out, our staff team, and our statewide community of formerly incarcerated members, perhaps also students in our program, and families and supportive teachers, people directly impacted by incarceration, and our allies. I've worked in Lewiston for many years in many capacities tirelessly to make the city that I love a better place. Additionally, I'm the single father of two beautiful little girls, 6 and 10, and I'm also a person who has been incarcerated, which I'm very upfront about in hopes of challenging entrenched narratives and stigmas. I know both how my history impacts my children's experiences and simultaneously how important safety truly is for parents of young children. We acknowledge that the fears about safety, given the ongoing violence in the Lewiston community and the incident in Westbrook in June. Our work at MIO is about creating art specifically around these issues to be in dialogue around topics like harm and violence. MIO has partnered with schools and correctional institutions for many years and has always followed institutional protocols requested by our partners. Our team met regularly with LPS and LMS admin, as well as teachers and staff throughout our partnership. The facilitators that create the plays in the school alongside the youth are individuals who we believe would ultimately be welcomed into school spaces, even if deeply looked into. They filled out the necessary volunteer paperwork with confidence that they would be able to fit the requirements of the school system. We stand by our work, our team members who have deeply committed themselves to the most marginalized populations and to our 15-year history of safety in our groups and performances. MIO creates incredible art that not only impacts individuals in our groups and in their lives, but also gives entire communities a new way to engage together to talk about real life issues happening in students' lives and in the community. I want to deeply reiterate that our org, just like you, take the safety and future of our children and the Lewiston community very seriously. And I know our work has already made the Lewiston significant impact on the Lewiston schools over the time that we've been invited to partner. Those who have witnessed our work overwhelmingly attest to it. We are hearing discomfort currently in terms of the partnership that we have engaged in over the past 2 years. And we are taking that feedback to give pause in order to explore our structure and relationship. The core of our organizational process allows us to take in feedback and allows us to help direct us to the most constructive and effective means of creating communication and understanding. We want all of those components to be agreeable to all parties, and we are open to discussion and engagement around our approach always.
Thank you.
Good evening, counselors. My name is Joseph Jackson. I'm the executive director of Maine Prisoner Advocacy Coalition. I'm in leadership with Maine Inside Out, and I'm a convicted felon. Also, I'm on the sexual registry list. Now, I've heard my name come up here quite often. In fact, in recent days, my picture has been posted on Facebook with my address. I should also say that I've been appointed by the governor to be on the Juvenile Justice Task Force to oversee juvenile criminal justice. I've worked in Long Creek And in Long Creek, I work with kids that were as young as 10 and as old as 18. Right now, 12 years old is when a kid can go to Long Creek, and 14 is when they can be committed to Long Creek, which is the same age group of the group in the middle school. And many people don't understand is that many folks here, this department has one of the highest rates of youth suspensions. Lewiston has been one of those places, and it's one of the places that's had the highest rate of youth incarceration. So when we're talking about our kids, we're also talking about kids who find themselves in the system. What I've wanted to do, and what I've seen that the evidence shown is, we need to hear from these kids. We need to hear their input. We need to see what's going on with them. And decision makers need to look and witness this and be able to hear what these kids are saying and figure out what they need to do to figure out how to help them. Because right now we've let too many slide into the system. Now I've worked alongside judges, including the judge that sentenced me, both judges that sentenced me. I've been appointed to a task force by the Senate president. I work alongside the first Black Speaker of the House. It is no surprise to me, and I've organized in this community. I've organized with families because the teachers and the leadership did not reflect the student body. We have a majority Black kids in this school district. And I see very few people in leadership that look like them. So I'm going to continue to organize in this community. I know my responsibilities are as a person who's been convicted and a person who's on the sexual registry list. But for somebody to put my face on Facebook with malice language and my address, not only threatens me, but it threatens my family. So I have to come here to the school board to say something about that, particularly in this polarizing time. People are on polar opposites and polarized politically, and now somebody's putting me out there. So I have to come here, I have to say this, and I hope you start thinking about the young people that you represent. Thank you.
My name is Joelle Jackson, and Joseph is my husband. I am a teacher, a multilingual learner teacher at the middle school, and I was one as well at Montello previously. And I'm here to say that I actually feel less safe now in this community because one of the school board members is the person who posted that post with our address. So I guess I also would like to ask the school board, are you going to take any disciplinary action against the person who underwent that action? And I question, the safety of our students. And I would also like to say one other thing about the sexual registry. That's an old story. It had to do with one other person. Those two people got married. And it also has to do with racism, which is why that happened, and heartbreak, because Joseph lost his first wife when she was young. And the anniversary of her death was the 17th of September. And when he told me that, he still had tears in his eyes. So I implore you to have compassion and understanding and recognize that people move on from their mistakes. So I think that's all I have to say. Thank you for listening.
Are there any other? Thank you. Give me just 1 second. I'm trying to reset the timer. Sorry.
No problem. I'll try to read fast.
It's not resetting. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. Delete. Thank you. Okay, go ahead.
Hi, my name's Tim Gallant. I'm a resident of Lewiston, Maine. I'm here and I'm deeply disturbed by the actions of the Lewiston Board Committee Chair, who not only said some really derogatory things about community members on Facebook herself, but also lied to the Lewiston City Council last meeting. I believe it necessary for her to resign from the school committee. It is evident that she denied posting something on social media herself regarding an issue discussed in a previous school committee meeting. But we have clear evidence in this room. Obviously, nobody would be here to talk about this if it wasn't going to be an agenda item added at some point. That further supports her dishonesty. As a role model for our children, it is unacceptable for her to engage in deception. Lying is never okay. And anyone believes otherwise, they too should resign. Tonight's attendance clearly indicates what's going on. I would like to ask the whole committee not to consider your vote to table or discuss surrounding MIO. I believe they do some great work. I don't believe they need to do it in the schools. If parents want to send their children to work with them, I think that's fine, but not in our schools. I've heard enough now to know we should be focusing on the safety of our kids and not on programs or things that look to be socially gender. Secondly, last meeting, the superintendent mentioned the potential and accuracies of background checks. And I agree. I used to work for a school district. Sometimes they'd come back and they weren't clear. We'd have to do a follow-up check on it. I reached out to the Maine Department of Education to confirm what he told us about people who do not work as employees, whether they do or do not require checks. And he's correct again. He himself and you, the committee, can make that decision. You can let anybody you want in to the building without a check. I think it's a shame that a grandfather can't go on a field trip without being checked out, but convicted felons can come work with our kids without a background check. I don't believe that's an appropriate way to do things. I have already requested them to look into it, the DOE. I said, yeah, I think there's something wrong going on here at the school district, and I'd like to have some clarification on what's supposed to happen, written policy, what you're going to have or should have that maybe not being out there. I don't know why we instruct individuals to supervise students in the school property to begin with if they're not in a curriculum approved program. I hear that all the time for you all. We need to be a curriculum approved program. We want our kids to be the best, right? Did they submit a curriculum to you about what they're doing or what's going on? Is it available to be seen? It don't sound like it. I don't see it. So again, I think this memorandum of understanding should be left on the table to go by its wayside. That's my point. Thank you.
Any other members of the public wish to speak? Is it Joelle? Is that what your name was? I just wanted to let you know, on the sex offender registry page at the bottom, there's a disclaimer that says that if information from that page is being used in a malicious way, it can be reported and they'll follow up with criminal charges. So that's something you might want to look into for your own protection. You're welcome. Agenda item number 5 is to receive a 90-minute workshop with guest speaker Sayeda Abdi, who specializes in multicultural work, trauma, and mental health practices.
So just structurally, we weren't sure how many people would be in the room tonight. So we have set up to move into the larger space where Dr. Abdi can share a slideshow with us, and she's open to a dialogue of Q&A. But just a little bit of background, and she said, don't say too much because she's a pretty humble person, but a lot of the work that she has done has been quite impressive. But she really has a lot of experience in the multicultural work, especially as it relates to trauma and trauma-informed work. She's done a lot of research, education. She set up programs in different parts of our country. She's traveling a lot right now, and she's certainly an expert in her field. And we look forward to what she has to share with us as it relates to mental health practices, trauma work, especially as it relates to our immigrant and refugee youth. So if it's okay with the chair, we will take about a 5-minute break to pause and transition into the other room. School committee members, if you wouldn't mind sitting in the front 2 tables, and we will participate in the workshop. As I said, a couple of things I didn't mention here, but video, was reintroduced. We got announced about this today. She was in her at the University of Minnesota. But really focusing on the trauma, mental health, refugee and immigrant students, how they approach school, back to behavior. Currently, our demographics are roughly 47%. In our community, and it's been a large refugee population. That is where this is something that really wants to work with. So, without further ado, I'd like to choose. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It's for them and okay, I'm Canadian, so I can say another friends. Thank you all for having me, and I'm really happy to be here. I have another thing. So I hope I see my clients. We have a very short time, so what I'm doing is speak for about 45 minutes, and then have 15 minutes Q&A. Does that sound okay for everyone? Okay. I will start. I have a slide, but I'm going to be through that. I said, Superintendent said, I did focus on. I think there's much indicators, and I asked, I say, everyone sign on to help the children. We don't look at indicators because no one knows children, I don't say, but I also know I would work directly work with the school system, like first 29 now, maybe I think mostly in these schools. I work a lot here, and I know how the child indicators and different harder every single day. It's like, especially with everything that's happening. So I'm giving them more to see what your needs are specific and how this works. So hopefully the Q&A, you have more specific questions to ask me. One of the things we do is that there's sort of use anything on an patient side, so we're saying that no matter how good the intervention is or the work is, it has to be that context. Because each content is very unique, right? So it has to be that and that. I'm going to start with these questions, and these are just general questions. What we done when we're so focused, especially on mental health, around the idea of developing interventions, and giving them whole populations and never those interventions. And one of my questions has to be, why? And I think we need to figure out the why. Instead of focusing on more interventions that are many people are able to see, to really focus on how we engage in communities and especially children and students in support that maybe available, how they are available. So in the refugee population, we know, and I was talking about trauma, but that's not really nice. People, something that happened to them, but it's important, and it's not only for refugees, for all the populations. So that is really important. So we know this population has trauma. We know that impacts the educational outcomes for the students, student performance, behavior, engagement, and other things. We know that. And so here you think about those, how much learning you have to do as a school or students done, and how much information you will have, and how to experience the needs, the diaries of refugees from the why is that important, because again, as we develop the solutions for problems we face, we have to understand the problem. We have to understand that's the population. As I said, I've never been able to in Minnesota or Boston or Vermont and try to bring all over Canada with here because it's very different context, very different population. So we didn't understand the background and also what kind of here is sometimes. So this question that we on as we do this training. Also, this is really important. When I do this work, I think about the framework I use for the student logical model. Why is that? Because often in the West, especially we focus on individual problems, but individuals, students, and anyone who wants to learn more about this, I would be very response without these slides. They don't compare this. Unless we want to do so a child is together in a family, in a community, in school, in students, in cultures. And so I think what we say that all this and this in the student college, it's not an individual. So there are things that can be in student college that are small attached, and there are things in student college that are not provided that sort of the post this. And if you really want to tell students and children, we want to understand what are what are the things in the social ecology that is actually hindering this child's well-being? And what are the things that are good that promote well-being? And what context we use this and promote the but you have to think about the whole social ecology to really support and promote growth and success of all youth. So I actually all of this, but one thing I want to clear is that parents can look at difference, even though there's also similarity. People always ask, what is the difference? There's a difference in legal status and asylums, because legal asylum are when you move to the refugee side. So there is a difference in legal status that have certain things that refugees come here only with their papers, or they're voting by the government, and so on. They may have similar but different experience depending where they came from. But it's important to remember that if you have a child, they may have certain access to different services that say what we call end of life. When they don't still, they don't have the status yet, they may not have access to all of this. And I know each state is different states set their own policies around how access laws and so on. But it's just good to remember also the heritage he doesn't have that trauma because the whole status is dependent on your experience violence and the country that's one. But even it's not I haven't immigrated from Canada, so it's not because I was escaping. When I went to Canada from Somalia, I was a refugee. When I came from Canada, they have to make myself. So there you can see the difference. So we have this sort of important to remember that collective experience that achieve children specifically come with war, fear, cancer, and safety, lack of safety, shortage in food. The first time such group of kids came to school, I was working 3 years ago in Massachusetts. Whenever they felt the line up for lunch, the kids would cry. They would not line up. And the teacher was see with the money said, why haven't we lined up now? These kids just came from the refugee camps when they arrived. At the airport, they were kids. We actually some of those kids I was working on. We actually had to go that for their like to ICU because they were at a very dead from hand. And so for those people don't know, this is different. There's more food that will start this school. As soon as food was mentioned, they would have to come because they don't get actually can be the first person. You made it. So you actually have to understand that experience and understand the people. So really important to understand, task. People have to be great by the government, by the thousands, by the neighbors, so I have members. People have to by their neighbors from working out with parents, right? So people have to be there who like them and that's the who they know. So how do you trust you? Once we get like this is actually that they don't know the other than getting people here, maybe 10 okay, and they watch on this side. It's important to do those. And this song that I really like to emphasize, but I don't want to have please keep in mind I work with languages. When I keep saying often teachers and the groups around how we do this for them. This is not just about this is about all the things where we may have had family trauma, may have had community. To give you an example, I spent actually I did a lot of research here, that's why I want to nearest we did a lot of research here. I did collecting data from me through my work and student hospital for 99 years. And so the data set we have all the initial pilot data as well as the data which student on this year actually includes main data. So it's very interesting to understand more about the children specifically so how many times but that initial work that we did We built on it and we switched the only existing was in the Novena. That is focused on what I appears in Massachusetts, Maine, or so that we can. Was actually the trauma that was more impactful when children said what talk about it was the work trauma. It was the trauma. So, for example, if you are accountable for trauma here, children were exposed to that trauma here in the US, they will have a better outcome regardless of how high it is going to start. So what that means is that I can share some thoughts. What that means is that we can actually have a impact on children's outcomes. I have to with trauma. And so, because here they have the immediate day, the parents expected to be safe. And so when you're in the country camp or in the war zone, you're expecting to get violence. You're expected to see people dead, that's what work does, right? But you're mind in America with that same place that has been beautiful for 20 years. And to come here and experience that same thing, it's much more fun than actually seeing that. So a single exposure to traumatic event can cause a lot of symptoms that actually really impact learning. So challenges, anger, homelessness, social withdrawal. And I also want all of you please to keep in mind the gender expression. Often I go to schools and people tell me, so either I have a first day example, I have interventions. The first day example intervention I have released, I go in 7 boys, 10 boys, never a girl. We've never had a girl before. We always find the girls by students because girls often generalize, because culturally that's a more acceptable way. So they make something handling, they make it fast, they make it sleeping, they make it cutting. But they have not costing habit and cost. And so people will not encourage them because that they can see the expression. So someone can be either not and not have any emotion, but actually sitting in the class and just like listening to them. Or someone maybe aggressive behavior, yelling, disrupting things. They're both in pain, it's a different type of thing. The way they express it, the way they express their pain. So low GPA, high ground or least ground, so absolutely all of those forces measures are due to behavior, problem behavior, or different behavior problems. I will talk more about that. This is actually I this is my life, but I'm actually a member of the National Mathematics Center. I work with the state team and also on different we have environmental groups and groups and the work that the national group is that the national center not necessarily every child in America. And the child is actually involved both in outreach and also the events. To help children who have had experience, right? This is from the website. And you can see some of the how you may see it, the behaviors when you see the impact on their child. Angry outbursts like absence, impulsivity, physical enforcement, so you might even classify as behaviors and you don't need them back that trauma. You may be trying to investigate the behavior, but actually what's important is to know what is driving the behavior. And especially know that faster behavior and what we need to do so that by the time we look at this behavior, they are ready to go to the team, sorry, it's how that they are not, the sooner we can find out the program in Minnesota, because if we get it sooner, we have a much greater impact than the way we're looking at the talk about the thing like any of us to talk about it. So I thought I would share with you that data. This is what we can talk from the program. This was a while from Massachusetts and Maine. So this is so the business has the demographics. I also do other programs that I wrote. It's my program. So we are going to use smaller people out of this. But Somalis are, most of the time, and very strong back because of the within the diaspora. And so this is what we created out of that. So that whole person came out of actually the legal experience. We put that my quality control office was doing the critical placement, the cost of Boston, and she was living with those girls when there was someone was in high school, and she, they would say, oh, I this school, yes, the doctor, maybe science paper, or the doctor school, and he did what never came back with us. Well, third. And he was asking question why I was giving them coming back, why I consider it. In fact, she did expand to actually look at the community, what was happening, what was the needs, what's the method of what our attitudes about here. And this is the pathway, so the right. And what happens when a young person who's in high school is struggling with behavior issues? So I want to, of course, the one scene is the behavior, right? So the behavior is, but otherwise, and so the community said, well, we tell the family, then solve within the family, you go to religious leaders, and maybe go to school counseling. This is why our project, because our model came out of that discussion, is students. Because the only outside person who didn't have to want to develop was student counselor. The whole the kid in the family. But then look, they, by the time they go to public mental health, it was like this was time when someone was actually at work. And they were like, we may send the child back home for what's called internal conflicts. And so you were like, I sent them to the parents or I will send them to the person. That was the choice, right? But what's really important here is that it's not like one way to remember that these some of these things that people may be more open now, but I still find the same stigma around out. It's really hard to get here services and having the many schools, right, normalize the stigma. The more we can do these schools, as I think that's why we both places they both school-based and that's why I think as well. And that is where we can division and we are family are accepting because we want to give education or be because the concept is the child is the division of success. This is one of the primary efforts both by the minister appreciate one of the program there was like talking to everyone that is something we back in our culture because we are like well, we want to talk about the issues, so ask the teacher, well, they don't know if there's a solution for the problems. They think you don't have a problem, talking to the parents, so they don't think it's impact you. And that part was things to impact and it's also related to nature. And we shouldn't start to God and should not be talking about complaining that much. They think you should just write everything up on those shoulders, and that's how it works. They just think people shouldn't have problems like that. There can be a certain guidance or certain system that just people who are expecting what we have. There's a lot of people in that I said, take personally you have to kind of complaining that our cultural tradition that when you're having you're struggling to share with other people, you're actually doing back, saying back, it's about your family, it's about your family has that not to complain about your family, right? And so there is all those things outside. And as educators, we know actually, I personally know what the kids either should learn how in by school or should be as a college represent. They will struggle. They even the kids that are starting in that college and struggle with second. Speak the comments about they don't score they So how do we all know about this? Well, we do one thing and we might do nothing, but I don't think all of it. It's that I do really moving away from behavior focus. And this just so you know that it was the idea of we move away from behavior to focus on experience. Instead of asking, why did this kid act like that? I know that's you to say, why did my kid, why did I, why did this happen to my father? But I can say, let me understand more about this experience. And how they in the family are actually experiencing what's happening, like what's happening in the child right now, what we really have experienced, and how it make it. And I know that sounds a lot, but actually just speaking the way understanding why are you giving away this. So what has happened to them, what have they experienced, what are the things we have to change to actually help this development. Tom is all about speaking. When children are here, they, and many times because they don't listen. And so there's this idea of, I think first I will say, I protect myself, that's what we put it together, right? So how do we get this in? How do we understand it? How do we understand how to make more about the brain and how it is? So that I want to take that. For many of our kids, we move away from behavioral focus to really focus on child's experience, child's perception, child's it sometimes it's I don't talk about this, but sometimes we sit here around to be both here. It's like talking to you as a point back in 1997 school, in school, in school grounds in the 1997. But I went here to kind of private school program for refugee kids in high school in Boston, and I didn't bring this course. And I would tell them, like, first when I thought about this, about that, like 20 kids, they don't have to walk, but there's students stuff is. But once I went to teacher, and they see the impact that you get, they should be about progress. Something that's about like giving children, helping like them practice to change their content, and create routines to help children so they know what they're saying. So they know what they're saying. So children talk about multiple kids in their day and something that's simple is better. Simple, something that's simple, like if I don't have to sit down giving them things to do, so you give them permission to work on, but then how they are very simple things you can interact and change those children's better. So that brings me to where those children in a certain way they have not necessarily control. And we remember that out. And this is something we use the program or the model that I use is actually this sort of spiral the model where children are doing certain things to learn trauma. They are actually making their life to be in it. So to use this to put it the platform. I will give you a story about children. How am I doing like this? 43 minutes. Okay, so I was working with this school system and doing programs with kids, and one day they tell us, even every day at this hour, specific hour in the day, the whole school, 7 minutes, small school, shuts it out. It's school where kids were involved. So the children actually just arrived. After the day, involved with your ones. But this child in every day, with sons, backpack, and goes to go to the house. And the teachers were, we don't know why, we won't tell us anything, but we don't have something. Anyway, so my speaking, and then they said, every day he's feeling good, I don't know why, but everything starts on the day. There was some here, the principal, and everyone was waiting. So I said about this child, and they said, okay, I heard that every day, that I want to go home at that time. So can you tell me more where you want to go away? And he goes, well, when I was in primary school, elementary school, but that whole about my teacher, when he was angry, his voice would go up. And then he would start hitting us, like sick, whatever he had. And he said, when my teacher in this class, I can tell him, this is going on. I hope I happened when I used to use the way great thing that had the windows and the doors were not covered. So he just jumped out of the window to go home when the teacher started. Maybe it is. But here he can't do that. So he doesn't try to get out of the wall. He said, when this teacher is in my class and then what's going on, I want to touch out, but I can't push down the window, so I try to stop. So They did that was with, and someone sends to me, he's trying to say it's not. How would we know that the state is different than the laws of America? Right? So that is really survival. So if you think about your main three parts, survival creates the part of your brain that is part of it's giving you sick at all costs. It's instinctive, it's responsive, if I will turn out, you're done, last thing you have, you don't really process information. Emotion brain, responsible for all emotional experience, how emotions are assessed or passed, and so on. And then our thinking brain, now we have to school and teach them how to brain work. You want them to concentrate, organize, chat, reason, problem solve. You want them to use your frequencies and use social cues. And look at frequency. This person, you don't want to them having arguments and ways went out. And you want them to like have values, all of those things, right? But what's happening in kids in trauma, people experience trauma, is that they're experiencing what we call triggers. Things that remind by the very argument that remind them of the words that they want to do. And it's any person, not going to be any person, even a teacher, even a school person, this kind of trauma. We sometimes be facing things that remind them of the bad. So when faced with different situations, faced with things that remind them of traumatic events, individuals have experienced intense and disturbing feelings tied to the regional trauma. And that feeling can lead to behaviors that's been out of place, like that we find about the soul, but actually need to be listened and what is it. Or those who have kind of the fun of the line of violence. Right? So if we have all day, we have triggers in the school, in the classroom, because of someone's voice, things we look at, failure, these are the possible triggers. I want everyone to just look at this and tell me how many we have organized for the students, how many students are, how many, what we have to tell me, you think everything was not impact some of the kids that are in the schools. Sorry? Yes, and you and the others. What about you? Especially if they are academic failure. I have kids who will actually shut my class and create a lot of fires to them out of testing, that out of the work. Because then they don't have to face the shame. If they get picked out and they're in high school something, they don't have to face the shame failure. So all of those can lead to those behaviors we just talked about that are normal in when they're later, but they are not. And you look at it because you don't know what is triggering that kind of mean and understand when you need something. So what we call this is what we call like the way that we conceptualize the spending of animal and the thinking, right? I know this is a lot, but think about there's something that happened in experience is sent, and then there are 2 weeks you can go. You can either go to the local, which is what progresses to amygdala, which is what we call the amygdala head check reason. Because instead, if it goes up there, the cortex, and then you process that information, you say, I'm not going to turn. So let's say it's not a loud noise experience. A child class hears the voice experiencing explosion, hears it with loud noise. And so they, they sit, they have never had no exposure to it, there's danger that it's then it will go out and process this picture and then it will actually go to the amygdala will say what kind of emotional reaction we should have, right? Whether it's the kind of emotional reaction that should trigger the fight response or the kind of emotional reaction that says no harm yourself, it's not. And then the response, then will be the appropriate response from the whole community. The kids with trauma will have trauma effect. In other words, and this is really important also. Every time who's being exposed to trauma has the symptom. In our research, it was 1 in 3. 1 in 3 had the symptoms, but 2/3 had and have symptoms. But 1 in 2 people have meet the criteria for clinical diagnosis. So I just want to make sure that we don't get something about it. So, but if a child has asthma and has a traumatic, then they will just go, you know, the teacher is saying something to me, they will interpret that statement and then they will go to the response. If that makes sense, I don't communicate, but think about how you're right. Go, right. Immediate threat, writing in class, active correctly, focuses on information from the center of the concept by the brain. There is no detail. So if you see, if you have kids are jumping between things that you don't understand, you don't have the detail about that. It's like watching a little box of TV. You see something that you don't see. The high confidence and longer allows for the child to be mindful to think about something. And this is something we can teach. The child who's in here now. That's the other thing. I think we need to work better. I should have followed that. The other thing about culture is really important when we think about how when it comes to gender, because the gender experience has to do by culture as well, culture makes it work. Culture, when you give us express and understand and work out all of those things. So children from different cultures, and every child will have think about what scientific part of it, but the culture part is different. The culture part is specific culture. And also, I talked about a little bit before, but is the combined of trauma in the past, so that experience and then service in the past, and now the additional trauma. The fact that children that interview for a name as in Minnesota will endorse more trauma exposure, and trauma exposure will be seen in two that was built for war. And they had more exposure to guns and violence in the US than they did in the war zone. So think about culture for the world, this really is because culture and how we see the world. Culture, all of you culture was in the meeting the other day, and I was talking about, I said, let's not forget about the white culture. It's not just like other people from the everyone's culture, it's school culture. You know, culture is system culture. Everyone has culture, and we all there's this sense in America that people who are not just have culture, but you know, like American, white, and all American, and culture, but everyone has culture. And the systems can even work. And we have to examine homes. What is I actually used to use that here, but the idea of the lens we use the world. They color, think about the glass and green color. And we basically that because of your project. I basically do it with actors. It works better than it's good. It's all better because that's what you say, that's what they see. And it's bringing those colors that we can actually talk about. And I used to think about this, but now I think of humility is humility, which is the idea of again, it's not it's not understanding of the bias, the blind spots, what are the things you assume about them. Like being a good child, being a good parent, being a good sister, those are all cultural powers. So think about those things. And then really like think about all the solutions. You know, I can still say what can be changed from the community side, from the suicide, think about what can we change. This is something really important to me, like I have a for how to get the virus, but we can do it. Somehow then we need to change ourselves. If we would fail our child, we need to turn the lens on ourselves. We need to say what practices are we living. We look like this is really important. I'm going to say that, but I have to find like a therapist. I have to solve my friend who's a therapist, and today I said, how long have this patient? He said, here. And I was like, well, in a year, you have to check and see if that actually is going to work. Like if you have such a long time this person and just something like it's not maybe someone else, the same way every time you and I know every experience, I don't talk to people about working with others, but when you can for your kids or the patients who work, but also we can help with better. Like every single day I wake up and I say, you know, as a leader or director of the project in which I work, if things go wrong, things are working, if they're engaging families, if they're not counting our service. It's very annoying. It's very ask. But that's part of our work, is engaging people. Not our work is making what we do, outlining the goals and values of who we are serving. And if we fail at that, then it's all okay. That's why it's such a value to face yourself. So engagement, you cannot, no matter what good education, how, whatever you have, how good it is, if you can engage parents and children to come and use it, you're okay, you're okay. And so some of the key things, we use cultural workers and people, not say more about it, but really engaging practically, how people trust. Community partnering, very important partnering, community agencies that are a lot of work. I will not go into this, but I will tell you the key things expanding the schools, whatever the schools all over the country. The one thing I said is we have to sort of break the walls, to do what you do what others. So, for example, we have two kinds of schools. We have a stepping stone for parents to learn English. We have had house support. We provided all kinds of others to bring the computer training for parents to actually expand the services that are used to make families come to the school. We use cultural workers. This is more, I think I don't remember doing that because I think it's more for the school. You really think that a friend of all of you, but many different conversations that are longer. But it's really to bring in more cultural support for parents and families in these schools. There's another interpretive, it's beyond interpreting, it's legally, we call it a breach between two cultures, and they can really expand and put us on something teachers and educators and expand into social program and families in this kind of school. I will tell you my country in Minnesota is the most asked thing. Like teachers who's like, I think is very more formal this thing on. And so I'm gonna leave this. This is just, I will share this problem. It's really understanding what are the values to set that, and understanding what are the values engaging, what are the, and this is for our work to identify those, and then we said it's strategies we use. But for your whole system, you can make it all around these as the what are the values for school setup for your kids, and then try to find ways to all of them. And this is commonly done therapy, which I use a lot of use. Which is really exciting about, again, we do the group when it's a group work, that's that's so popular, and this year we actually shortened the time we do, so over the class, so this would be more than 10 weeks now, we're going to be 8 because one of the 2 times. Was just talking like today, and what school we in 8 classes, we need 8 all schools, 8 schools, and it's one school we need. Again, this is something that the teachers and school personnel are asking for, is to teach those kids. That's something that really works. You know, you bring children together and common space, you know, that's all the lot of culture and community. But the idea is to really think about a shared approach to helping kids. This is specifically how right? So you are community education, the peer support, and then the last 2 are the traditional parents. Again, you know, I would want everyone to think about families have kids have goals for their life. If you're working with children and you're working with families, you understand what the goals are. Families have goals for their children. They don't want to be disciplined. They don't want to be, you know, they want them to succeed. All the work I do, I talk about things like, you know, what's wrong with the child. I talk about the dreams that families have and how they, whatever I do in my life, those dreams, whatever I do in the service of those dreams. And I think the more we do that, and also like you're different because you are the board. Also, you're different. You know, when I came to her, I don't have a problem with you. I have to tell you what see that when my father, I want my children to work, I want them to come to school. And so whenever I do must have them. So really understanding the roles, goals and dreams to the perspective. And then on the other side, you understand the sort of thing, what is called, what is part of it, what is in the career of this child. But every time I want to create a plan, that's what we have sources of pain. What are the things that are possible? I think we have time, which I promised done, so. So I, we feel that as a community engagement, we sort of created the framework. And I say community engagement because I think the more we talk to the community. This idea of creating a collective is important. We all have to see, like, when I go to a meeting, I say, we all have to see, I want to go to the community leaders, community leaders, state leaders, we all work towards. We may have differences in how we get that involved, but we have to think about the vision, we have to think about our goal, right? And so really, the big part of this, again, starting with the starting the fact that we talk about in place. And you have a certain knowledge, yes, it's resources, we have to really have that is bringing together all those pieces that make a success, not just one organ. And you, that you own your own abilities, your own biases, and all the things that you have seen to do that, right? So I am Somali, I do go to the government, I go to the rest of the world, and lived here since I was a kid. I went to high school in that's been going. I went to high school with Brenda, I didn't see you didn't somehow, you know. You know, actually, we had a sister in high school in Brenda, by just moving. But I didn't. So, so really, like understanding yourself and who you are, and the way you communicate, and I think about communication, the way we communicate, we understand the world on the failures. So it's so important to understand. And really informed by the cultural background of who we serve. This is standard, really big standard, to say what people pay to us. This is strong and powerful. The refugee and immigrant families we are having survived something that 90% of us must survive. They survived the war. They live in a refugee camp. They get to their family together and healthy. They are strong, they are powerful, they are resourceful. When you engage all of that in a certain region. And safety first, please keep in mind, you know, when we say safety, we don't know each other. The safety, the physical safety, and emotional safety. Which one are they safe? They feel safe to interact with us. I know when I work in schools, I always talk about the fact that if you want to collect, so I was in school, people ask me, say, you know, the student and learning, some classroom, and with how I sometimes I just ask the question, is there a teacher here that the kids are not having these problems? And usually there is. And I would say, let's talk about it. Because that teacher has succeeded in engaging with children. And then you have in your own building, you have a number two, no one's going to listen to you, not connected, you don't have a relationship with them. We talk about first, before you can even do trauma, you have to create a safe space, you have to have a connection relationship, and then. And so if you want to have children who are learning to engage, and you know what, when everyone is alive, and everyone speaks the same language, and everyone has most people have the same experience. It's not easier to have those things because we can share experience. But when you have people that's big enough, you don't have to work much harder than anyone else. Believe me, I don't work better than you. Some of you may know that, but some people discover the process. It's a lot. And the beginning of that is the acceptance. Things are going to be challenging, but also that it starts with your own sort of something like what can I do? I'm coming as a learner, going to those families and communities to learn from. You cannot follow them if you want to understand them. You cannot engage with them if you don't understand them. You cannot help them if you don't perform engagement with them. So that's really important for me to say. And then I'm going to go through that. Thank you. Thank you. Please, how do you want to do it?
I know you've done work to set up programs with the communities, knowing roughly where we are. What are some of the things that you can predict may happen in the next 5 or 10 years?
I think that I would say like the next, I would just talk about 2 years, I think. It would maybe longer, maybe the 5 years. I think every school system I've ever done, every single school system, when I came in and for whatever reason, in kind of grant, the other grant, now with the satellite of the grant. So in some ways we have like resources, but even with the resources, it's because I think change is hard. Change even like, so I actually think of it like a proof of concept. Once you get your feet in and start doing the work, it's easier, but people will see things that are feeling, and then there's more like, oh, this works, right? I think often for educators, it's also because people are really overwhelmed. So it's like I can't do one more thing, whether it's training or whether it's adding something to your classroom. And so often I think getting things serious. Let's say the next 2 years, that's how we need to start. And we were there for a long time. Like it's not only school, but we constantly people in this. I think it will take about 2 years, I would say, to start getting people to accept, and I don't think accept is completely nobody will let me accept it, but I'm hearing, I listen to you, and I'm on board with this. And then the other question is how long will you see how. So I think that's the most important, actually the most important thing is really to start having a normal and realistic discussion. I know there is only 2 directions. It's not very complicated, right? You either change or there's no middle, right? So changes happen. I would do the change. I think we do other schools that have implemented some of the models that are I think that 2 years is really, 2 years is the so the partnership, so partner community, partner with parents, partner with think about how you want to do, and then sort of the school staff and others. Personal areas, but the champion by someone who's really so champion. You can do that, and try. Doesn't work. This is very simple. Can do without us building leaders, can do without more. So you want the people who are leaders there. And when I engage every school, specific schools that are literally, if I can engage that principal, then I have no reason to do that. Because that is where the perfect policy, and then it's so I would say that 2 years to build up a system and then to get the school to start. And if you want to start a project and so we started. It was really very sad. It was also it's like we don't have enough resources to do, and we have more demand. Also, we don't be so nice. I don't Minnesota. I like Minnesota nice. I need a little more content in our lesson. And what the content is there to debate, but I need more content. I need more detail about the 2 to 5 years. How do you get the product to go? Oh, that's a lot. Yeah. Something in my talk today would be A. This is challenging. B. It's gotta be after that challenge. You cannot give up. You cannot just say, the roads are supposed to make things. I sometimes I can tell you if I feel like it's also like my staff, like I'm not going to this because of the sometimes it's happening there, in the beginning, they feel like they are just, there and they face a lot of difficulties in the building as well. And so it's like I said, it's about engagement, it's about when the light bulb on. Like, oh, you do this much as it actually helps. So this is really a million perspectives on that, because for them we should be talking about outcomes. You know, and in my project we have very robust evaluation attached to it, where we are actually doing parents, school personnel, interviewing teachers, social workers, school leaders, because we're going to hear how to experience the project. What is the thing that, what are the things they think have been better? Because that's part of the thing, we want to make everyone better. So outcome for children, I would say that's what I was saying, we wanted to, like pre-test and post-test and but in other place, every other place that we have actually implemented the outcome for children. One of the things we focus on in the news is what we call forming that, which is actually to success and about that. So in the model we use was something like model negative, the kids who to go. So how to look at this kind of connecting kids to give people school personnel so that they know if they are in certain thing. And so we measure that, and that goes out and it's broad, like this school I know this school likes me, people like me, things like those are the kind of things we want to achieve. So kids are going to be excited about this school every day. Okay, any other questions?
Talking about being a cultural thing, you need to be district on, be successful. If you started at the high school and then roll it back, or the opposite way, depending on, those. Then you get the middle school not doing it, it's going to be lost, right? So go the other way or be the other way around, that correct?
Thank you so much. That's such an important question. Number one, how do we organize if we do it? It's like how we organize it would be very complex. So it will depend on the resources that are available on the need. The one thing that we have a problem with, I want to encourage it, but we have to face the reality that the world is not for the school because we're going to start to do things with the most pain, right? But I know that a lot of groups will hear they do so well. I know also involving the way to connect the increase middle school, so they go from integrated. So we did a lot of integrated groups out here. So when they go into middle school, we are actually creating a connection there. So that they said because they were like this, and coming to middle school, I think you never thought that they would share, but we kind of so yeah, I kind of managed to. I don't like to start with kids that are put up with trouble because we have that stigmatized intervention. Usually we have to create for a lot of kids. And we don't have kids that are succeeding, like diverse kids from the same community. So it would be, you can actually start with max. Yeah, so max went to the school, see them 16 and then we'll expand. And I see you looking at the J. It doesn't be too small, but I think if we start small and things that it's much better than trying to do a lot. Okay.
I'm glad to hear that trauma informed work is being done. I think that needs to be done regardless of culture. That especially in the Lewiston area where there's poverty, violence, a lot of things going on. I think that this would be glad on to the trauma informed work. But my other question is mentorship. Is there a way to have mentorship, to have some kind of people that if they want to start doing this work, that there's mentors out there that people can talk to on a regular basis to bring up issues and problems?
You are so good. Thank you. First of all, I really want to touch my heart that you said about trauma, that we serve every child. We actually assume every child may have that trauma because we don't know. And so we approach every child with safety, with care, every child. So yes, this, I agree with some of the things and talk about every single child in our schools. And actually, when I did this training, I was instructor. And the second part, I created a program called Reaching the Gap in Boston. That was all parallel students, mentor parents. We are big scholarship. So yes, when I came, the first time I moved, when I talked about in 1997, that was actually, I went to Harvard School, I was in Harvard School, I included students, Boston College, and program called Pulse Program, which is for undergrads, but they're quite community work. So mentoring is a new part, because you know what mentoring does is, it takes those children from that world, showing them more as they can move them. So my high school, we started on this long class, like 30 years. So it's much bigger. They would actually take kids to these projects. They would take them to museums, they would take them, but they would also mentor the whole family, they would go to the home, they would go to the children, they would to the moms. So I think there's a way, for example, to work with kids or other colleges around here to have mentors come and support them inside. That's how this problem, and especially if you're going to do after this program. And
student, let's say, seems that since the Somalian refugees immigrated to America, it's been about 20 years. So I would suggest that most of the students in our schools, our second generation, they have not experienced the refugee camp, and I know generalizing from the exact statistics. They have not heard the shots and bombs when they gang warfare and everything else. It seems problems that they face to me is more on race and religion. And are these steps still appropriate to students that have not had the cultural shock of running death in their native country?
yes, so number one, there's two parts of it, but one is both. One is that trauma is actually, like I said, first of all, intergenerational trauma, after audience when we say the Holocaust, and that trauma is still with families, even though it's so many years, right? So, and this, about children, let's say I was the mother of the mother, the family video, and then 20 years was on the same video when they were had 15, right? They went forward. And that had nothing. And so the interpretation, because trauma is about how we experience the world. If I'm standing here and I know to say my body, my emotion, my brain, my heart starts going like this, my body, like I will have that quite this response. And then how I interface with you with your feel that I can make it what was scattered. When we parent, as people who experience trauma, they have trauma that trauma effect, which is the PTSD or trauma stress. We parents, in a way that teaches children that the words gonna say. Because children know whether the words say from not right. You know, when a child falls down, they look up to their parent to see the cry. Like how bad it's fall, right? Like a 2-year-old would fall and look at the mom and say, "Mom, someone then the child is not coming." Like the mom is like, "Oh, it's fine." The child will most of the time. So the interpretation program was full security program, but actually you're talking about race and religion, that also the experience of peace, like discrimination and the behavior that around discrimination, if you have the impact that discrimination has when children psychological violence and how that the way they do it. So you have a lot of programming, but even if they had nothing that's happening in the impact, it's very that especially if the child has letters and California. Thank you for us.
Right. Say one more thing is, I'm a student of sociology, and I know that sociologists, they really said it takes 3 generations for a group of immigrant to be acculturated and mainstreamed into American society. Sometimes the talented second generation will take shortcuts. The talented second generation will be the least of the fine Sometimes names will be changed. One of my immigrant relatives was staying in Stefano, we changed it to Christian. And again, to speed up the filtration process. But there are three ways with communities, there's no quick fix. Communities that are going to be mainstream for the dominant group where people look like us, they have our patterns, speaking the voice. We're not going to see enough intermarriage or community relations to create a whole new group. So it seems to me what we need to recognize is, as you may be aware, the salad bowl approach, where all of the individuals are distinct and we work on valuing their culture, their heritage, recognizing their experiences, recognizing that there's no one like that's going to cover all the problems. Your thoughts?
I also my case is actually was looking for a problem. I would say this, I try to stay away from generalized things, right? I will tell you, I see one time, I started my life. I see one child in front of me. And my one purpose in life is how I save that child. Every time we use a child who gangs, drugs, violence, we have absolutely failed. I don't know what's going to happen with this law. To you, it's wonderful, but I don't know what the break look like. I do know, I think like we're making this on the other side about what we the leader of what the change has happened. To me, as school people and as providers, we focus on the one child, one student. You know, that work with the one community, one family, and we say, how can we do a higher step of this? How do I don't know, that's the time when we solve the blood do this. We can do it, that's what I'm saying. I don't basic maybe harder than I can hear. And then we see that building and that community and those kids and those people and more members that I work with, we made a difference. So like for me, that is like I was sure how to answer the question. Because I kind of feel like, you know, if you picture person, think about the fight, way more kids, and I'm like, I'm working with kids. And hopefully, the video will make a difference. Oh, a good answer. Anyone else has a question, please? Like, I think we almost got it, so I don't want to give you something else.
But I don't see any questions now. I do know that you will be spent time tomorrow with school counselors. You will also spend some time with students, talk about meeting, and also working with our administrative group. So, more conversations to be had. Thank you very much. Transition back.
Testing.
Moving along with agenda item number 6, to receive information regarding enrollments. Superintendent Langlis will present.
Yeah, so we shared in the packet a list of the student to teacher ratios. And we can dive into any particular field that you wish. If you notice looking at the chart, some of the numbers may not fully add up, and that is in part because you may have students that are in a separate program. So you could have a number of kids in a grade, but if they're also in, like, say, day treatment. So if you do the straight math on the kids in the classes, you might be a little short. Those are kids that are in special populations. So if you're just tallying, you could see some anomalies there, but we do have some numbers that are high. We know that numbers of 25, 26, in that area, you start to get into those classroom spaces that are really full and challenging. We, excuse me, as of the last 10 days or so, been looking at these numbers very, very closely and actually not taking enrollments into those classes and looking for other spaces in the district if we can find transportation, if that so applies, to move them to other schools that have a smaller population. That creates a number of challenges where students are not going to school in what would be considered their home school district. But we're really trying to monitor these numbers, and we continue to get enrollments. We're now at about 5,600. We've lost some students to some things, but we've also gained some students in areas that are also concerns. We continue to work to hire those positions. We've shifted some postings to more district-specific postings, just trying to get some more applicants in so we can interview them and see if we can get people to go into spaces where we have the highest need and take that angle or that approach. So I just wanted to share the chart with you. I think, remember, Bopal, you shared some concerns prior. And I think you're right. These are numbers that we have watched closely. The other thing we're watching with this is what's the attendance like for those classrooms? So trying to hypothesize around, are there, say, 25 kids on an enrollment, which is big, that is a full class, and say, okay, well, 5 of them don't come to school very often. We're finding the opposite. We're finding that those classrooms are full and the kids are coming and they're there all day, which is a good thing in one respect, but again, creating those challenges. And I think, was it 4 students towards the end of last week that we had enroll, specifically 2 Connors in various grades because their family moved. And so we found ways for them to stay at their other schools or send them to a different school. The challenge is really around transportation. We can't always do that. We have some areas that we don't pick up in that area and go to, say, McMahon, where their numbers are a little lower than some other schools. And so logistically, we don't have the time in the runs to do that. We're continuing to work with transportation to expand what they can offer through Hudson, try to bridge some of those gaps, including other forms of transportation. But these are high numbers. They don't violate any state law or policy or threshold, but we are keeping a close eye on them.
Member Bopal.
Thank you. I'd like to thank Jake and his office for putting up the statistics and giving the layout here. I know you had certainly other things to do that this took your valuable time away from. Last week when I brought this up, I had my 2 sons call me afterwards, said I had a little bit of an arrogance and an attitude when I brought it up, and I certainly didn't mean that at all. But I do tend to get letters from in-house in my ward and outside of my ward connected to teaching, because being a former teacher, I guess that's a label I'm going to wear. And looking at this, no way did we know we were going to have 5,600 students. It's not like I'm God and absolving your office, but there's no way that you could, foresee that this would happen. And I'm just concerned with the numbers and the effectiveness of that. I put that out for a agenda item, so maybe our committee here could brainstorm what we can do about it. We can't take kids that are already in the school, say, oh, there's too many in your class, and move them. That should never be done. Teachers are shortages nationwide, just not in Lewiston, Maine. But I'm concerned that the large number of kids in classes has serious implications. It will cause teacher burnout, increase in absences for mental health, increase that maybe I'll go to a smaller district with smaller pay, but with smaller classrooms. The grass is greener. I know as a teacher, and I had back in the day before there were really union effectiveness, 30 high schoolers in one class. But looking at this, I can see that again, going from say 18 one year to 24 the next year is a 25% increase. And gosh darn it, any teacher, not just me or the teachers affected, are not going to do as good a job with a larger classroom than a smaller classroom. There should be a more, not equitable teacher to student ratio, but definitely a smaller one. Remediation is going to be harder. Special interest is going to be harder. We have kids that are mainstreamed in the classes, but have special services, and they need specialized instruction and special care. And to have 24 third graders in a class without an ed tech, it's like being a zoo person in a 3-ring circus. How do you wrestle and control them all? You know, high school and middle school, there are better coping strategies, but when you have 24 ankle biters, you know, all wanting the attention and needing their noses wiped, there's not enough of you to go around. So my point is, if we can't move kids, which we never should unless it works out for the family, if we can't find teachers because they're not exactly falling off the tree and into our laps, what can we do? One of the thoughts that I had is, again, and I'm sorry for the people affected, but we have specialists. We have specialists that ensure quality instruction, that help out new teachers, that give a clarity to the new programs that we're trying to institute. We have specialists in all the disciplines that were promoted to that position because of, not the Peter Principle, their level of incompetence, but because of their level of quality work, and they'll affect more change and more things. Do we need, for example, and I'll throw this off and somebody's going to, you know, fall off their chair, to maybe have some of these specialists go back to the classroom to help alleviate these numbers? Do we have, I don't know, does any member of the committee have any solution to this? There are no easy ones. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Bowden. Oh, sorry. Were you going to respond to him first?
I just want to throw one thing. I know the committee has, by way of budget, appropriated more than these ratios. And so 4th, 5th, and 6th grade is an area we continue to struggle to hire. And those are your highest numbers. So we have positions, we have funding, we can't find people.
Member Bowden.
Thank you. I just wanted to thank Member Beaupont for what he had to say. I definitely have dealt with these high numbers before with my own children. And I remember there was a bubble coming through McMahon, and they added a classroom, and that classroom continued every single year. And you may have answered this already, but it really looks like 4th, 5th, 6th grade at Connors just needs one more teacher. Have you just not been able to hire that teacher, or is that teacher not in the budget?
We have not been able to hire. There were some interviews earlier this year, some that they thought were going to be able to be moved on that didn't play out, and some that the interviews were just, let's say this cautiously, but it seemed like even teachers within that grade felt like hiring someone that couldn't do this work was more of a burden than having bigger classrooms.
Gotcha.
And so I respect that, but I also think we do need to find people to be in those spaces.
Well, I would echo what Member Beaupont said about, I believe you're talking about the coaches that we have in this district. And I've been saying it for years. I know that they do great work. But they were also fantastic classroom teachers, like the best of the best. And they've moved on to coach, which is, you know, important work too. But if we're having an issue like this, you know, desperate times call for desperate measures. And these are some of the best people that we moved out of the classroom. And I feel like we should move them back in the classroom, even temporarily, until we can fill this spot. So I actually really like that idea, Member Beaupont. So thank you for bringing that up.
Any further conversation? Member Eames?
Yeah, also thank you, Member Beauparlant, for the very good and eloquent plea. I agree with everything. And I would also like to ask about the ed techs, just having another body in the room when you have 25, 26 4th graders running around, having another adult, whether it's a student teacher or an ed tech or a volunteer parent, like somebody that's in the room. I would advocate for figuring out all kinds of new and innovative ways to make that happen.
Member Hurd?
Thank you. I don't I'm trying to think of the best way to say this. So for in-district transfers, like, and I don't know if people know that that is an option for them. Like maybe they have a grandparent or a relative or somebody that lives in, maybe they go to Connors, but their grandparent or relative or someone that watches their kids often lives in the Geiger district or the McMahon or something like that. And it would be an option for them that their child went to another district. Have we, if they're willing to transport and like those types of things. I'm not saying that we'll provide transportation, but I don't know if parents or people even know that that's an option for them.
It's an option
To do that.
to apply,
Apply,
to
right.
request.
That's what I'm
We don't
saying.
just grant them, and transportation is a big factor with that.
Right.
usually.
No, but I'm just saying, like, if it worked out that so-and-so's grandparent or aunt and uncle or whatever was the one that was like picking up or watching the kids after school, and they were having to drive, and they live in McMahon district, and they were having to drive to Connors to pick up their kid because that's where their parents lived. If they could apply to do like an in-district transfer just to make it more convenient for them. I don't even know if people even know that that's an option for them, you know, to do that.
I would say that if they can transport the kids, that's a conversation to be open to. I think oftentimes what we see is that they can't, and then we have no way to transport them over there. And that's usually the bigger challenge, but I think you're making a good point that sometimes 3-4 kids can make a big difference when you talk about how to manage a classroom space. And if that exists, I think it's an option for people.
Member Eames?
I didn't know if it was because it's in the child and the parent's interest to densify the classrooms. So I'm wondering if there can be a call out to the heavily populated classroom parents. If you have a grandparent or a babysitter or a daycare in another district, would you be willing to move your kids? Because the kids would be in a less dense classroom. It would be so, but I don't know if we have a mechanism for that.
I mean, I can ask Principal Ferrara to reach out to the parents of those classes if that's what would help.
Just as a trying to think outside the box kind of option, de-densifying by 3 kids in each of those rooms would make a big difference. And there is room in the other schools do have room.
Any further questions or comments by the committee? Open up to public comment.
Okay, that's right. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. My name is Kennedy Raymond. I'm a 4th grade teacher at Connors Elementary School. So I have 25 students. Lewiston is a community I've come to love. When I initially started my career here 6 years ago at Martell, before we were Connors, I was naive, inexperienced, and ready to save the world. I've learned a few lessons since then. And as I spend more and more time here, my draw to the community becomes deeper and deeper. I've met some of the most incredible students, colleagues, and community members along the way. I love it here, and yet I'm standing before you to tell you that this job is so incredibly unsustainable that I don't know how much longer I can do it. Due to the staffing crisis education is facing across this country and Connors Elementary School is living on a day-to-day basis, I have 25 students showing up to my classroom each and every day. On paper, 25 4th graders may not be categorized as overcrowded, but that is 25 report cards, 25 FMP assessments, 25 math assessments, 25 students and their families to connect with, and 25 students with unique and sometimes extreme needs, not to mention countless IEP and RTI meetings and goals to memorize. I promise you, if you were to come to spend a day in my classroom, you would see how incredibly difficult, really impossible it is to meet the needs of each of my students. This is true for so many of my colleagues now. Classes of this size are unsustainable and are in contrast to the elementary school class size policy in our district manual, which caps students at 22. My students come from a wide range of backgrounds with unique abilities and experiences that create this incredibly diverse classroom dynamic that makes working here in Lewiston so incredibly special. This is also what makes working in Lewiston so incredibly challenging at times. I'm here tonight calling on each of you to consider what you can do to support our students, educators, and community members. This is not sustainable. Each and every year I hear from colleagues who are being asked Each and every day, I hear from colleagues who are being asked to do the impossible, who are feeling defeated just within the first month of school, who cannot imagine continuing to work like this. When we talk about recruitment, we need to look at our salaries and how they compare to districts both near and far. When we talk about retention, historically very low, we need to consider the working environments we are subjecting our staff to each and every day. When we talk about equity, we need to consider how that looks across our district at each of our schools. Equity isn't that every school gets the same resources. Equity is that each of our schools gets what is fair in relation to their specific needs. I work with some of the most incredible people, from my administrators to teachers to ed techs and support staff, all who want to work toward the same common goal, to provide an equitable and accessible education for our students. But in the current conditions we are working in, this is an impossible feat. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Member Beauplant?
Thank you. As chair of the curriculum committee, with Dr. Reams being, a member with me, and we've gone through math and science, and I've been around for social studies. We're starting the second series of math, and in January we'll be starting fine arts, and all valuable, all state of the art, all let's update our curriculum, let's do what's relevant for new populations and so on. As a classroom veteran, I just know that new initiatives add up, and it drizzles down to the shoulders of our classroom teachers, who are, as we see already, overworked, overburdened, can't do all they want to do because of large class sizes and unfunded mandates from the state and everything else. Is there anything we can do to put a hold on any new demands put on our teachers in the classroom? I mean, last week I joked sarcastically that back in the old days of the 80s, administrator would go to a conference in Orlando, Florida, and bang, we'd have a whole new way of doing things. Those aren't the ways they are today, Jake. And I didn't mean, for you to, as captain of the ship here, as steward of the 5,600 students, to feel that that was a personal attack. But there's got to be something, and even little bits and pieces that we can do to take a little of the pressure off our teachers. I mean, the number of IEPs that they go through, the number of special services they deal with. I don't know, can we put our heads together and see what we can do to put on the brakes on a few of these things that might take time away from the necessary one-to-one that we ideally want for our teachers and kids?
Where are we at with the teacher in training, I'm not going to phrase it right, program that you had been working on at the state level, as far as getting new teachers in our classrooms and learning while they internship, not internship, what is that?
The apprenticeship.
Apprenticeship, that's the
model.
word, thank you.
So actually lots of things developing with the apprenticeship model. There's a grant being submitted today that's been worked on for additional funding and finding new partners to help facilitate the work. We have, I can't see Bill right now.
It's actually working
Oh,
on the grant.
Bill's actually finishing the grant outside the door here. I think it's 22 folks that have started taking classes in connection to the on-ramps for it through Central Maine Community College and through USM. And conversations continue with UMF and University of Maine Augusta, who are seemingly interested in also having students. We still need the students. And so we've put forth pretty good effort to sustain that and to help get it going. But those pathways still need people in them. And so we're going to continue to try to get those folks.
Once we get to that point where we have some bodies, could part of that be like a co-teaching model where we have or is that going to increase the burden on the teacher that's already struggling with an oversized classroom?
It's actually a great question. So I think depending on the chemistry of that room, and I think the teacher should have some say in that if they're having a training type model. The way the apprenticeship model has worked is that we would compensate that person in training. And so that would be a funding question that would come full circle. So it's possible. And we've explored already grant funding, obviously first, but there may be something that we request in the budget cycle to say, can we look for X amount of dollars to do just that, to have someone that we know has already shown us some ability to pair them with a teacher that has, that bigger classroom setup to, while they also do their college courses and have their apprenticeship work. But again, that's in the apprentice model. Those folks are paid, even if it's less, they're paid to be on that work site to do that work while they're in training.
Member Bowden.
Thank you. First, I want to thank the teacher that just came up and spoke. I didn't catch her name, but Kennedy, thank you so much for coming up and speak. That takes a lot of courage as an educator to come up in front of the school board and say what you just said. So I really, truly appreciate that. And it's not the first time I've heard comments like that come from teachers. It's concerning to me, and that burnout is real. And it's kind of a scary thing when we're only a month into school. So I don't really know how this works. I don't know if as a school committee, we would have to vote on this. But you know, I kind of want to, I don't know if charge is the right word, but put it out there for you as a superintendent to really, you know, take a look at our coaches and who we have, and maybe sit down and have a conversation with all of them and see if any of them are willing. But it sounds like this is kind of an emergency situation where we might need to put someone in place until we can get someone hired full time. And so I'm going to stand by that statement and really hope that that gets looked into, and that hopefully we can alleviate some of the pressure on these teachers, because 24, 26, 25, 25, those are really big classrooms for fourth graders. I mean, that's 100 kids in 4 classrooms. That's a lot. So yeah.
Member Reams.
I just wanted to reiterate that we do have the budget, right? The money is there to fill in those spots that are currently unfilled. And we, even because we have a bigger number of students, I know there's a delay, but at some point there'll be a slightly bigger amount coming from the state. So there is the budget for filling in these extra bodies. And so I'd just like to, again, add on to all of these comments and urge us to put our resources to good use quickly.
I want to be real clear that we have to do so within the collective bargaining agreement. And so there's some other things out there that that maybe could be considered that would require negotiations.
Member Bopola.
Thank you. Just full disclosure, I had Kennedy Hubbard back in the day as a student in 2 classes at Edward Little High School, and I'm glad I didn't scare her away from teaching.
Member Hurd.
Thank you. Yes, I also want to thank you, Kennedy, for coming and speaking today, this evening, because I think it is really important to get that like in the trenches point of view. I know Lewiston tends to be a hub for our asylum seekers or people that are coming to this country. Is there something at a state level that we can go to them and say, like, we would gladly take them, but like at this time, like resource, like school wise, we are at capacity, like unless they're willing to fund us more money to bus these students to a different district. I mean, I don't know how that, I mean, we can't just keep taking if we don't have any space. Like, what would we do in that instance? If we had, let's say we had 25 families come here and they were it happened to be in the Connors district and they had 4th and 5th graders, what would we do?
So again, we get into the distribution piece. And so the folks that are at the Ramada who came to us from Portland are attending McMahon because they had lower numbers. There may be a couple kids going to Connors because of the promise daycare piece, because they qualify as McKinney-Vento, and there's rules around who gets access to what things and where they land on the list actually get moved to the top for things like pre-K. So well, other than that, the rest of those students have gone to McMahon because we already knew that Connors was looking full. And again, as we had 4, I think it was 4 students last week, that 1 from Geiger and 3 from Montello, that they physically moved, they relocated. And so their school within their district would have been Connors. And we're keeping them at those schools, and that just took some logistical work. So we already have some mechanisms in place to try to keep it from growing. But I do worry about those constraints. As far as other people showing up to our community to want to go to school, the rights and protections of people who come here and want to go to school are the greatest that there is. We continue to have to try to problem solve no matter what.
I think I had asked that the last time we had a conversation about this, but have you figured out what the actual proposed district capacity is based on, like, when Connors was built, we said we could have up to this many kids, and what we should have and versus what we do have?
So we've started to pull that. I don't have all of it for you. And in part it's because we've added special purpose programming, and we never really said, okay, this classroom went from a cap of say 30, which I know is not a real number from a practice, but fire and code might say this room can have 30. I think Kennedy might say no chance. But I think we also have some special purpose programs that you can't put 30 by different state regs. So I thought it'd be an easy task to just tell you, here's the occupancy maxes, but it's more complicated because of our programming.
And when we were building Connors, I think it was it 800 or 909, and that was based on state teacher to student ratio or our district student to teacher ratio? Don't know. Okay, sorry.
My guess is it's probably state because of the way that they do the formula for the funding. It's all based on their own numbers and ratios. So that would be my guess.
Thank you.
But I think, again, I wasn't there for that particular conversation, but we moved 600 plus, I think, from Longley and 200 plus from Martell at the time. So that would make sense to be around 900.
Member Heard?
Thank you. This is a clarifying question. Did we redistrict, like as a city, did we redistrict like wards or anything like that? Will that change?
That was a highly contentious conversation many years ago, and the redistricting did not change. I will say though, however, the lines are not as black and white as they once were because we have situations like these 4 students that just came up. So we don't have room to add those students to that, that 4th, 5th, 6th grade class because they're so big. So now they live in Connors district, but they're going to school elsewhere to 2 different schools. And that's just the way that played out. This happened in the past. I know I inherited some things where some class sizes got big in other areas. And a lot of students were actually from a redistricting place sent to McMahon because McMahon has a sliver in the downtown districting area. So you did have buses going through. So when you had population increases in the downtown area, but your schools were full, again, this predates me, they were sending a lot of families to McMahon because that bus was coming through and could kind of hit the next street over or have kids walk to that bus stop. So the districting piece is very real, but there's also a lot of gray area in those lines because of capacity and how full the schools are, and also what buses run near there.
Member Damon.
Jake, if we were able to hire a 4th, a 5th, and a 6th grade teacher for Connors, do we have the physical capacity? Do we have spare classroom space so that we actually could put those teachers in a classroom and reduce these numbers?
So I've had this conversation with Principal Ferrara, Karen and I did recently, and he said, yes, absolutely. And they have plenty of desks, chairs, tables, all of that equipment. So if we needed that for larger classrooms or for those additional classrooms, if they get hired, we have what we need to do it, including classroom space.
And the increase this year from last year was almost 300 students.
Yeah, we were having conversations last year that were in the low 5,200s, and we're now closer to 5,600. So it's a 300 plus shift. We are seeing some of the numbers drop off a little bit, and I think we find out kids that they're not actually here anymore, they've moved, or we finally got a records request, or actually a number of the asylum seeker families that came right at the start of the school year have found housing elsewhere, and it's not in one spot, it's kind of all over, and they're moving their children to schools in their communities too. So we're seeing some numbers drop, but it's not substantial enough to not have to do something about these particular areas.
How many students do we have that are attending Lewiston schools but don't live in Lewiston for whatever reason, whether their parents are a staff member here or there's a superintendent's agreement, or do you have that number?
Not off the top of my head, but I can assure you that there are over 380 requests this year for school kids coming here or going elsewhere. And that's just what we call superintendent agreements. And so those are kids that either, again, come to Lewiston schools because they live elsewhere, or they go to other schools, but they live here. That's not counting our in-district or what we call out-of-district requests. The language is terrible. I apologize. So out-of-district, which might feel like people are leaving our district, are actually just leaving their district in Lewiston, requesting to go to another school in Lewiston outside of their immediate that map. So all in all, Cheryl and I actually just talked about this recently. We have over 500 different scenarios that we reviewed this year to try to agree or deny. And a lot of them are, a good example is I've been going to Lewiston schools since I was in kindergarten, and I'm in 11th grade. I'd love to finish at Lewiston. I say yes, unless that student is causing mayhem throughout the day or have terrible attendance. I mean, we've got some families that have asked to stay here that are, straight A kids with no discipline issues, heavily involved, and parents just their life situation threw them a curveball and they're living elsewhere physically right now, but want to stay. We've also had some, it's the inverse. I moved to Lewiston, but my kids have been going to Edward Little since they were in 5th grade, and I want them to finish and they're seniors. I don't feel right denying that. It's been a tricky conversation with our enrollments because while they were at 52 and change last year, remember that was about 180, 190 kid drop from what we had seen just a few years ago. So while we're seeing an influx, it's higher than what we used to kind of be hovering at on an average, but it's not a massive influx. I think because we've reduced so many positions in the budget, that turns into, yes, we have these positions available, we could hire for them, but it also turns into different parts of the culture and climate of the work of, well, if they're reducing positions, do I stay? Should I go elsewhere where it's more stable? Those are the conversations that come up. So we can have some teacher loss based on stability because of budget, projections that are hard to predict. And I don't think anything should be off the table, but I also say that when we have massive turnover, like we have had over the last, say, decade, to not stick with a curriculum for a multi-year approach and to not have coaches to help people who have never been in classrooms in these very unique models and strained labor times, I think we would see it be a detriment to kids across the board. And so I'm very hesitant to do that, but not saying I don't recognize the need that we have right in front of us right now.
And just one last question for the general public. I know that when these conversations come up where we have massive increase with students coming into the district, people get really concerned with the impact on the taxpayer and how is this being funded? Can you just very briefly explain that, how we get reimbursed for all of these students so that the general public understands that it's not necessarily an increased burden?
Well, so the funding formula, which gets complex in a hurry, is there's this whole committee knows from the state. Each student presents certain factors as part of them being educated, and the state kind of prorates the different levels of need for different things. So for a student that requires certain levels of language support, we actually get more than a 1-to-1 subsidy. Students that require certain special education programming, we get greater than the 1-to-1 subsidy. So those are all factors as part of the model. So to your point, when we submit our school enrollment numbers, our state subsidy should increase from the projected amount. However, that balances with the April 1 number. And so I don't want to get too excited about that subsidy yet because that will ebb and flow. And if we have students leave our district for whatever reason, that number can actually shift downward. But it does cost more to provide the services we provide. So it's little things like more toilet paper, more flushes, more soap, more wear and tear, all that kind of stuff too. So it factors in pretty quickly. And I'm kind of seeing Austin out of the corner of my eye because it's also more iPads, more Chromebooks, more chargers, more stations, more all of those kinds of things. So it all kind of plays in. But to your point, there should, if our enrollment stays up throughout the year, there will be more subsidy, and it will also, and this is the scary piece, this impacts the projection for next year. The problem is that if the projection doesn't play out, let's say we just have a plummet, then we're working off a budget that doesn't have fact behind the subsidy. It'll have a gap, and that can be real scary. That will feel almost like a curtailment during the year.
Member Eames?
I just had one other thought. When my kid was going through the high school, 9th grade social studies was taught by a student teacher. We don't pay the student teachers, right? So
Loaded question.
Would that be a great way to?
No, we may not pay a student teacher. So different institutions have different rules. And because of the labor shortage, we're seeing more and more universities and colleges willing to say, okay, instead of student teaching, you're a teacher. And we're getting conditional or emergency or waiver type certifications for them. And they're teaching. And we're hiring them. Yes. And so whenever we can, some schools they're not willing to do that or not able to do that because of their own bylaws. So that can get tricky. But between student teachers trying to keep them here to hire them and or just paying them to teach the class and having more of a mentor model, we are absolutely already doing that. Wherever we can, there's provisions within the rules.
Is that all?
Just one, because you brought up student teachers. the word kind of on the street and talking to other universities, the pipeline for educators is lower than they've ever seen. And so when we talk about student teachers, and I think I shared this fact with you all prior, but like University of Maine at Farmington, that is classically in Maine, a great teacher school, last year placed like 4 math and science people. 4. And that was, a state placement. So we used to have a period of time in which we had to try to find additional teachers that would host a student teacher because there were so many. And now we're trying to hire them if they knock on the door. So the numbers of folks going that way are not great. But I think the apprentice piece and those kinds of models with on-ramps to get people into our schools is a great next step. I'd also plug, if anyone here, and I'll probably get my hand slapped for this, but anyone here listening in the audience, talk to those on the State Board of Education, because some of the rules around certifications and those we can hire and employ and get reimbursed for, they're too stringent given the market right now. And so if they don't loosen up on some of those expectations, we have some scenarios in special education, we actually have people interested and we can't hire them because of the rules of certification. And what I've been sharing to the state board and to the Department of Education is right now Plan B in Lewiston is we close that class or we close that school. We end up with numbers like we're talking about tonight. Those are the outcomes of all these factors that we can't get around because it's not allowable.
Member Beaupont.
Thank you. If not dismissing the immediate problems or concerns, but if we look ahead to next year, I'm going to say the dirty word, is there a possibility of redistricting? And I know my inbox will fill up on that one, but something has to be done. Just the quick summary, if people here don't see it. And we recognize that Connors is a bigger school, but there are 19 classes with 20 or above for Connors, 2 at Farwell, 1 at Geiger, 0 at McMahon, and 5 at Montello. Something's got to get done.
So I think the redistricting question is going to be one that is loaded for community, but I also want to be mindful that we have what I'm calling aging communities. So McMahon once upon a time needed an expansion because there were so many people that moved into that area that had children that were going to school. Well, those houses it's a beautiful community, it's a beautiful part of our city, and people are staying in those houses as they age, and they're now maybe with grandchildren, what have you, but they're staying in those nice houses because they work for them, but they don't have children going to school. And so some of that population shift is really housing availability and who's living in that immediate community. The redistricting conversation is certainly very complicated. People do like some choices that they get to make, but I also know in places like our pathway subcommittee, we've thrown it on the table and we're not anywhere near bringing something back to you, but should we have a pre-K to 1 school? So everybody in the city goes to say McMahon for pre-K to 1 or pre-K to 2, and what fits where, and looking at other school-based models, then I'm not saying that's a solution. I'm just saying that there's lots of ideas of how we might do school a little differently, separate of redistricting. Not a lot of people wanted to give up their community school. I think that's a really important factor. But we do have the discretion, and I'm very cautious with this, and it really hinges on transportation of if we have to enroll kids there, because there's physically no more room. Kenny, I'm using your name because you spoke so eloquently about it, and I'm sorry, but there's no more room in Kenny's class to put more kids, so they're gonna have to go somewhere, and we have to figure that out. So there's redistricting, do we do something different altogether? But there's also the fact that redistricting is kind of happening to an extent because of enrollments. But it is disorganized, and I wish it weren't. I am also mindful that we have multiple projects that have started in our tree streets to build massive housing units, and those children are going to have to go to school somewhere also. So we could actually see a population increase 2 or 3 years out that we have to be ready for.
On the redistricting subject, several of us sat on the redistricting committee 9 or 10 years ago, and it was not very functional. So bringing something like that up again, I think would be even worse this time around. I feel like there'd be a lot more controversy around it now than there was then. It wasn't fun. You have anything else on this? Nope. All right, agenda item number 7, to review and potentially vote on the second read of the following policies listed on the agenda under letters A through L. There a motion, Member Bowden?
I'd like to make a motion to approve the second reading of the policies listed A through L.
I'll second that.
Any discussion? All in favor? It's unanimous. Agenda item number 8 is report from school committee. Sorry, am I going too fast? Report from school committee chair. The only thing I have to report on tonight is a few upcoming events in the community. The Rally for Recovery is this Saturday from 11 to 2 in Kennedy Park. It's a family-friendly event. There's going to be youth and adult speakers sharing their experiences with substance use, either themselves or in their families or in their communities. There's children's activities, face painting, bubble machines, cotton candy, all kinds of fun things. Food, there'll be free burgers and hot dogs throughout the day, and it's going to be a great event. So that's this Saturday, 11 to 2 in Kennedy Park. On October 7th, there's a partnership between New Maynard's Public Health Initiative and Lewiston Public Schools for the Community Give Back Day, which will be at Longley. And it's a wellness, there'll be wellness and education vendors and different give outs at that as well. And October 28th is the next medication drug take back day, where Healthy Androscoggin hosts this at Lewiston High School and at Bedard's in Auburn. And I believe it's 9 to 3, but I don't have it in front of me. And any medications, unused medications, expired medications, they'll dispose of them safely for you. And that's all I have for my update. Next is report from the superintendent.
I'm just thinking like, what happened this weekend? So all seriousness, we had initially reported that there were 5 students that broke into Longley. We've learned more. So let me, instead of going over the other facts that we had shared, at least that's what we knew at the time, just update the committee on what we now know to have happened, having followed up with some different pieces. There were 7 kids involved. They're all related. They're all connected to 3 sisters that are their moms. So it's kind of like 3 sets of kids. 7 in all. Some caused a lot more damage than others, and there was at least one that we think didn't cause much damage at all, but we're still gathering more data and facts. On the back side of the building, a screwdriver was used to get into the seam of a window and forcibly pry it and shake it until they could kind of get to the lock a little bit, and then use that to open it up, is at least what I've been told. Got into the first room where the window was and absolutely destroyed that classroom. And there's a door that adjoins 2 classrooms. These are adult ed classrooms. And went through the door that adjoins the 2 because that one doesn't lock, and destroyed that classroom. When they got out into the hallway, they were trying every door they could find. Because of the break-ins in the past, or the break-in that we all remember from June of 22, that was really, really bad. Staff and leadership and custodians have been really vigilant about making sure things are locked, fixing some of the locks, that kind of stuff. And so they couldn't get into other spaces. We can see them on camera trying. There was one other classroom that Greg, the custodian there, had just done some wax resurfacing in preparation for a class that was supposed to start pretty soon, and left the door open because of the fan blowing, because the other option was to open a window, and he didn't want to leave a window open overnight. And that was where the medical training things were. So we have medical beds that were beat up on. We're not sure about the extent of the damage just yet. There were medical training mannequins that were heavily damaged and beat up, and arms ripped off, things of that nature. Not usable, from what I can see. And so they were, they got to the other side of the school where Next Step does its programming, the cafeteria. They were able to force those doors open, and they looked like they just threw stuff around, like grabbing chairs and just throwing them. Some damage and bending, but overall something that could be picked up. Further into the building, they got into where Next Step does its breakfast and lunch serving. It's like that little, it's not a cooking area, it's just like a serving area, almost concession stand style. They forced open the metal drops that are there, and threw chocolate milk and ate some food that was left over and things like that. So came across 1 can of paint and spread that around. Greg was able to use the floor scrubber being there quick enough to get that up, and it was mostly on the floor. So that was something that could be done, but a very different break-in than the last one where they got into all kinds of spaces and absolutely destroyed the space. This was messy and it took a lot of work to pick up, but it wasn't full of paint and full of food and full of other things like the last time. And that's really because everything was locked, or most everything was locked up. So really just being vigilant about those kinds of hardening components are making a difference. So ironically, how some of this played out, and again, I'm still gathering facts, so this could shift or change, but students showed up at home with some stuff that they took from the school. And one of the parents said, "What is that? Where did you get that?" And mom actually started to pull some information together and self-reported, reached out to the police, went to Longley and said, "These kids are responsible for this," and shared everything that she had available to her. And so I'm appreciative of that. She's also asking what things can my children do to make sure they're accountable, whether it relates to consequences, some labor, whatever it could take. A piece of me wanted to say, write a check for $40,000 because that's what it's going to cost Lewiston Public Schools at some point. I didn't. I guess I just said it out loud. But really, when we talk about accountability, it's I appreciate people coming forward after and saying, "Look, this happened. I can't believe my kids did this." I'd like to think that I would do that if my children were involved in this. But where I can't myself, what I can't get over is how children ages 8 to 12 after dark on a Saturday are breaking into a school and there's no adult. There's no supervision. I can't wrap my head around it. And so my plea again to community is supervise your kids. We have the same issue with the fields during the day. If your kids are out and about playing with 6, 8, 10 other kids, go with them, teach them things, mentor them, but don't let kids be out and about at that young of an age, just doing whatever after dark. I can't wrap my head around that. I think it's, again, accountability is important and I can appreciate that approach. And I really, really do. But accountability is not just after the fact. Accountability should be beforehand. That never should have happened. Never, never, never should have happened. That was the first part of my update. Questions?
Do you want people to respond to that or you want to wait till the end?
Go ahead.
Okay, Member Bowden.
Thanks. I guess I have a couple questions. First of all, did the damage cause Lewiston Adult Ed not to be able to get up and running today? When are we projecting that they'll be able to get back to what they're doing?
So Director Tyner reached out to me yesterday. I was on site, so I got to see what the rooms looked like. Even though they were clean from being destroyed, they weren't put back together. And her request to us was to not host classes in those 2 spaces primarily, because they just needed time to put things back together. And I agreed with that. So those 2 classes didn't run today. She did think that they would be fine to run the rest of the week.
So along those lines of putting the classrooms back together and cleaning up the mess, I know this is probably a police investigation. I don't know how much you can say, but I'm just curious if, first, are there any repeat offenders from the last time? Or any of these kids, the same kids that broke in the first time?
So no, this is an entirely different set of kids.
And my next question is, are we holding these kids accountable? Did they have to go in and pick up their mess? Because I think that is so important. I don't think it happened last time. I could be wrong. I'm wondering if it happened this time because I don't know what other message to get across to kids. And I wholeheartedly agree with you. Please keep an eye on your children. Supervision is so important when they're young. I can't for the life of me figure out how these children were out after dark on their own and they were able to get into a school like this. Like this just blows my mind. So I'm really hoping that we're holding these children accountable, more so than just like law enforcement, like this school district is holding them accountable.
So I worked to reach out to families today. They did not help pick up, I think, for 2 reasons. One, Saturday night when one parent was there and willing to have her kids do all the picking up. it was still a crime scene, so that they could not on Saturday night. And Sunday morning, our facilities crew just said, if we're gonna do this on a Sunday, let's get in here and just get it done so we can still enjoy the day. And that's what they did. So they were out of there, I mean, by 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning, and it was completely at least picked up. And I asked this morning because there was still more to do. I actually asked one of the staff, how would they feel? Because I had mom's number and message that she wanted me to call her back this morning. And I said, how would you feel about the kids that helped do this come in to help undo this? And with a teacher standing behind her in tears, she said, probably not today. So I think the amount of work that goes into setting up a learning space for a teacher is something to take great pride in, and to have someone just destroy it like that and you're there to pick up pieces. I don't think accountability is something that they were ready for yet. I think it felt so violating to have that happen in your space. They didn't want the kids in there at this time. But I'm open to some other ideas for sure.
And there was, in the last incident last summer, there was at least one of the students that participated in the destruction that did participate in the cleanup, right? Just sort of quietly and anonymously.
Yeah, it might even have been 2 kids and also a set of parents that came quietly that day, but yeah, still doesn't feel enough to me.
Member Heard?
Thank you. So this is kind of a 2-part question. All of these students are LPS students.
In this particular one, yes.
Okay.
Last time there was 1 or 2 that were not.
And you said like 8-year-olds, right? So we're talking elementary age students, and we know the restrictions that we have when it comes to disciplinary for elementary ed students. So how are we approaching that? Like as a district in these types of situations, how do we approach that?
They're going to have meetings with me and definitely with you to start. We will have some obligations by law that we'll be mindful of, but I don't think it should restrict due process.
Any further questions or comments? Member Eames?
It seems like there's always some cleanup to do around here. So even if they didn't do it on their own mess that day or that weekend, it seems like we could consider putting them to work. Yeah.
And what are we going to do about the security at Longley? It seems very easily accessible to small children. How can we fix that?
Well, I once heard from someone that locks only keep out honest people. And
True,
and
yeah.
if you wedge a window or you're willing to shatter a window and climb through it, which is part of what happened last time, you can get in any of our schools, realistically. I mean, I think just looking in this room, if you're willing to shatter one of these windows, you could almost get a small vehicle in here. And so it's just, locks only keep out honest people. And the good thing about inside the school is the locks were effective to keep kids from getting into further spaces. I think the hard thing with Longley, because I was asked this question a number of times today, why Longley, why again? And I think the common denominator is we have unsupervised kids at night, but we also have a back of that building that is not visible to the road. It has a hill behind it, so there's no real line of sight down to it. And so I think that's a place you can just be without too much going by. PD does do drive-throughs there, but you can see the lights coming from around the front. If you want to duck, you can duck. And so I think it's about lines of sight in part. And Executive Director Grant's actually already been in communication with Seacoast to talk about some sensors that we might be able to put in there. This is something that we had applied for a grant to do some hardening and to put in some sensors and do those things that we didn't get. But again, that's how grant processes go and we keep trying. But to put some kind of sensors in there to at least pick up motion, what have you, on the inside. All that does, though, is notify a security company. It doesn't stop the damage that was already done with the sensor wasn't. We could be looking at the same scenario, but we could have responded maybe a little quicker. So it's not always better to have more security, and we don't have people on site overnight.
Member Eames?
It's 7 because there was camera.
So yes, we do have camera footage, which our IT team gathered and downloaded and shared back to me so I could review them. We were actually planning to try to share that out to other administrators and see if we could identify kids. Video was a lot of movement, wasn't wasn't great, but it was useful. But we ended up not needing it because of the parent that self-reported.
Carry on.
I'm sure there's 100 other things that I could just provide updates on, but I don't want to chew up all the time. We've had a couple of things pop up in and around. As you know, from our last meeting, we've had some fire drills and we've had some student pole fire drill. So we're working on those safety protocols. Those are all in place, but we're trying to exercise them and make sure we're doing things the right way. Again, another piece going out to parents about avoid, deny, defend. We continue to do tabletops with staff. That's not something we trained last year or the year before, and then we just let go of. That's still happening and in progress. So feel free to talk to your kids about what that is. And we try to be intelligent about what activities we do with which kids, but they all need to know about these practices that we're using from a safety protocol. We've got some new radios in connection to a grant through local 911 and fire. And so they're bigger radios that allow us to communicate directly to dispatch and or law enforcement. So those are people being trained on those, and we have more coming in to increase their capabilities. You get schools like Connors where these better radios are so much better because of the structure of that building and where it is in the whole. They don't have like great cell service. So often we just jump on our phone and we call 911 or reach out to someone in law enforcement that we know directly because of our crisis management plan. But if your phone's not working, it's not helpful. And so growing those tools. Gosh, I'm missing. Oh, yes. On Friday, we had someone not even touch their brakes and pile into the back of a bus at Pearson Park Street. All the kids were fine. The driver was fine, and the bus was assessed at the garage after. And I've been told that because of the way it sits up so high, the bus was actually fine. The car was pretty beat up, which is what happens when you drive into a bus without stopping. And so I don't mean that to be funny, but it kind of is. Like, I don't understand how you don't see a 60-foot long yellow bus with flashing lights and a stop sign that sticks off the side of it. You know, in a 25-mile-per-hour zone. So we're thankful that everybody was okay. Certainly a jarring situation. We did have two buses in the area that were also going to Montello, so they scooped up some of the kids in one and some in another and got them to school. There was about a 10 or 15-minute delay. Police and fire responded right away. They were great on the scene, so that was very helpful. What else am I missing? Anyone have questions over the last week or so of happenings? Feel free to ask. It's been pretty busy. Transportation is getting better. We have not had to cancel yet. I'm not going to knock on wood. We'll see what happens. But some of the runs are a little longer. Some of the buses are a little more full. And I just want to remind people, at least from my perspective, last year when we were telling 20 to 60 to 100 kids a day, we don't have a ride for you. This year, we are not doing that currently. And short of, a series of events, we won't have to. So we're thankful for that, but we still need to refine the runs. Some of them are long. You got to get out there early. We still are using vans on a daily basis to get students that might have an IEP or specialized transportation because we don't have enough vans with our contractor to go do that. They have more drivers coming on board. They had some that recently passed for additional licensing, and they've ordered more vehicles, is my understanding. So we're hopeful the next several weeks or so, this will improve even more. A heads up for anyone in the public that at some point we might tweak these routes, which is going to create another whole layer of learning, but it'll be to the benefit of people. So maybe you don't have to be out there quite so early. Maybe the bus won't be quite so full, but we'll need people's cooperation on that. It's a big machine to move all those people. So we say it needs work, but I'm also very thankful for all the folks doing the work, our drivers, our transportation staff. They're doing a good job getting our kids there and back.
The young man that was hit by a phone.
Yeah, was that?
That was last week.
I apologize. So we also had a student, I'm not going to use a name, I think that'd be inappropriate, who was hit somehow in the crossing of East Ave over near Green Street, which is right by the Hair 2000 place. I don't know if people know where that is, but certainly a very busy road, an easy place, I think, to not be seen because you kind of crest the hill coming one way and you're coming out of an intersection going the other way, more north. pretty severe damage to one of his legs. Did require surgery, went down to Portland for that. It left, at least in conversation, a lot of room for a lot of rehab and maybe future work that needs to be done to the leg. Also some, obviously being hit by a vehicle, so some significant, bumps and bruises elsewhere, including losing a tooth. Feeling pretty beat up. Mom and dad have been supportive. They've been good about communicating. Really just sad. And while I feel terrible for the young man, I'm just happy he's alive, because we've had terrible instances in our community where that wasn't the end result. So we're pleased that he has the opportunity to recover. But it was a significant impact to him, and he was hurt. While I don't know how it got out there that kids were there and like ran from the scene, that wasn't factual. We've actually been in communication with some of the other families and the kids who were like, I stood there the whole time and like was really worried about my friend and wanted to help in some way. And people told me like, it's a scene, like you got to stay back, and eventually left. But there weren't kids that were like part of the thing and then ran away. It was an emergency scene, and they were kind of pushing people back. So very concerned peers that are friends of his, that he's been friends with for years, that wanted to know what they could do to help. And so nobody ran from the scene. And I think it to me, it left an air of kind of mischief, and it wasn't like that. It was a terrible accident. The friends were right there, tried to help. So on the road to recovery. He is now home, and we've already started talking about accommodations for when he returns to school, just for mobility and navigation, things like that.
Is that it? Okay. Agenda item number 10 would be the report from our city council rep, who is absent this evening. 11, updates from school committee subcommittees. I know policy hasn't met again. Member Beauplant.
Thank you. Curriculum, we're starting up the second year. Thank you. Starting up the second year of the math curriculum shortly, and I guess in January we're starting fine arts. So should look forward to that.
Member Bowden.
Thank you. I don't know if you want to add something, because I showed up late. I'm not gonna lie. But the pathway subcommittee did meet, and I had kind of a crazy schedule that day. But we did get into small groups, and we started discussing by age group, like what the biggest hurdles are. And we kind of meet it halfway through that. And then we're going to start discussing what some solutions could be as far as getting kids to school, ready to learn, on track to meet the requirements they need to meet, to make sure we're not just passing kids through because they're of the right age to move on, even though they haven't successfully completed a standard. So there's still a lot of work to do, and a lot of discussions to be had and brainstorming. So it was a successful meeting, and we have a bunch scheduled. So we'll meet again, I think, in just a couple weeks. So yeah.
Member Eames.
Policy committee is chugging along. I'm not sure if I can do it now, but I went to the I'm Your Neighbor Books event that happened, and it turns out they have free libraries that they lend to schools for, I forget how many months at a time. I would love to encourage us, curriculum committee, to afford, take advantage of that and get the mobile library for free into each of our schools for a number of months this year.
A good friend of mine operates one of those mobile libraries, and she
Oh,
goes around the state and sets them up, and
fantastic.
that's all she
It's
talks about.
amazing.
Yes. Any other committees? With member Whitlow resigning for Ward 4, do we need to replace her on the negotiations committee, or do you guys not have anything coming up soon?
Currently, we don't have anything scheduled. Member Bowden and myself would be involved, at least in the short run. There's been some preliminary discussion about potentially starting up with the certified teachers, but that hasn't materialized. And other than that, I don't think we've got anything. And facilities has not met recently. So I think for the moment, we're all set.
Anything else? No?
Just, I want to add that finance subcommittee is meeting next week, I believe. And parent subcommittee that we've been discussing for a while, Megan and I have connected on that, but we also spilled that into our management meeting, which is our principals and directors. And we have a thought that's kind of in its infancy, but in lieu of maybe one structure over another, found great success with the middle school holding that parent forum recently, where they got to do Q&A and just answer questions that parents had about school and what it's like. And John from the high school bringing up having freshman specific meetings in and around the grade reporting period that are in addition to other communications that have gone out about grades and how that happens at the high school. But coming up with a kind of a part two of that conversation to have a coordinated schedule with parent forums that go through each school that would have obviously some Q&A periods, but also maybe some common themes that are all about our district and the things that we are doing, so that if parents wanted to attend their school where it meant something to them and their children, that theme could be carried throughout the district. And so instead of someone like me trying to facilitate a conversation where I don't have the specific answer to every single school and every little nuance, and not having that connectedness to the school your children go to try to facilitate that through the schools. So it's not there yet, but it's still an area of development around that parent pathway. The parent subcommittee.
Member Heard?
Thank you. So to also piggyback off that a little bit, at McMahon, Charlotte is doing breakfast with the principal, which I don't know if all of our principals are doing this or if that's something that she's just started on her own, but she does a different talking point or subject matter each one, and parents can come and sit and chat. So the one that she just did was about social emotional learning, and then her next one's coming up, which I can update everybody on that. But that made me think of that same kind of thing, just an option for parents to come and talk and hear and questions and be in the school and all of those types of things.
Thank you. Anything else? Agenda item number 12 is school committee community announcements. Do you have any? Okay. Agenda item number 13 is future agenda items. Member Bowden.
Thank you. It's kind of a strange one that came up today. So one of my children today at the high school was overheard a staff talking about the school committee and how we're banning books from the high school. And there was like this whole discussion going on about how we sounded like terrible people in her ears. And as far as I know, we've never banned books. I know there was a book in question that you reviewed and removed. But I was just sort of looking for an update on what is the policy there with books. I know we have a policy about banning books, but that's not something that typically the school committee has any weight with, right? Like we don't do that.
So the book policy or procedure, it has all these established rules and formulating essentially a subcommittee that would be made up of a diverse group that would be vested and interested in reading it and providing feedback as a subcommittee. And then I believe the last step is to make a recommendation to the school committee out of that subcommittee.
Okay.
So there is a prescribed process if someone wanted to review a book.
Okay. So I just wanted to make sure we're not handing down like, oh, you can't do this book, or you have to sign a permission slip to read this book, because these are all the things that were overheard today by an adult. So I'm like a little concerned about that. So I just wanted to throw that out there during future agenda items. Like, I don't know what we need to look into there. Kind of a broad topic, but.
Anyone else? I think that we should have an agenda in the sometime near future. No real urgency, I don't think, to discuss. I know a lot of districts are doing this and city government and everything. Going back to the way we were pre-pandemic, where we would record the meetings and then upload them to our YouTube channel instead of doing the live feeds. There's been a lot of feedback about how people can't hear, the quality isn't what it is. We don't have the funding to change that quality right now. And so I wonder if that would actually be more efficient, more effective, and we wouldn't have to tie up this wonderful young man's night every other week to hang out with us till 9 or 10 p.m. So I don't know if that's a conversation other people are interested in having, but that it worked really well before the pandemic. So I don't know why we couldn't go back to it now.
Yeah, and I've actually heard from other people too that this kind of sidebar conversations happening over the stream, which can get
Yes.
pretty, I don't know, let's say inappropriate, but we have no ability to moderate or filter that, at least not in the live moment piece. There's certain things you can shut off and limit or restrict, but then there's other components that you can't. So I think it's worth a discussion. I can be fairly traditional about this stuff. I'd be okay with going back to having meetings. And if you want to know what happened, you got to read the minutes or you got to show up. I know that's probably not real in today's world, but
I think it was really important, like during the pandemic and post-pandemic, for accessibility for people who weren't comfortable coming in person. But I think we're beyond that now, and it's an accessible meeting in person. And people can hear better when they're here. Agenda item number 14 is to enter into executive session to conduct student A disciplinary hearing, Title 20A 10019 and Title 14056B. Is there a motion?
I'll make the motion.
Seconded by member Medina. All in favor? It's unanimous. The school committee will go into executive session